Lots of really interesting things said, lots of great ideas. One of the things I think I got out of it was that institutional contexts may not allow generic sustainability processes ideas to work. I think it's great there's been a sharing of how to sustain, but for example the OU cited the lead-in time it takes to develop a course, which then has to have integrity and be stable for quite some period of time. So it isn't a case of doing something this year in one course and expecting that to transfer next year to a whole load of other courses because of that. And they talked about a much more incremental process of change. And I know I've heard that elsewhere as well, but I think in some contexts that's going to be even more the case. Ownership's already been referred to, and I think there was some very clear evidence in several of the projects who presented to us about where the ownership has moved to, and that this shift, some projects clearly began from the beginning with the team themselves not really having a sense of ownership but wanting it owned by other people and other stakeholders. And when that wasn't the case, I think there was clear evidence in the presentations of a shift, quite often to teaching fellows, to program teams, to managers, and quite often to students themselves. And I particularly liked several references to students as change agents, taking this process forward, so that it wasn't really just something that was being done to students or for students, but they were actively engaged. And I think we had several examples of that coming through. So students as ambassadors, I think, is very strong. And one of the other things, well, two other things. First of all, the notion of employability. I actually felt that all of the presentations that Andrew and I heard very clearly talked about the students having an enhanced skill set. What I didn't hear was about that being transferred into selling their employability skills. And I think, perhaps more could be made of that. And one other thing which I finished, I only had the opportunity to do this after we finished the Dragon's Den, which is why I'm still eating my dessert, really, is we were asked to do a little to-camera presentation, weren't we? And I think one of the things for me that was really exciting out of the presentations was the example of West Anglia and the need for their institution to recognise excellence within the institution, because what they were talking about here was not just a project about media, but what they were talking about really was a new model of learning and teaching, which was much more engaging and real world. And I think there are huge implications to that, not just for their department, for their school and the institution, but actually for the sector. And I'd really like to see their managers recognise that and give them the space and time to be beacons, if you like. Andrew.
Okay, a few things to add there. For me, certainly, from all the projects we heard from, there was real strong evidence that the key stakeholders, namely tutors and learners, want the work that have started in these projects to continue. And of course that raises the whole question of how are we going to continue this, because in some cases that needs investment and there won't be project funding to support the investment needed. So certainly one kind of key point we were feeding back to I think pretty much all of our projects was this notion that where investment is needed, it now needs to be embedded in departmental forward plans. It needs to be prioritised in departmental budgets, because it is the departments, and a good example for that was Exeter's business school, needing to embed some of the technologies they've experimented with, because the learners are saying, we've had a go at these things and we want it to continue. Now please continue to provide these services. And that comes at cost. I think the other thing coming out of that for me was the project in many senses have allowed a number of technologies to flower. We've allowed 1,000 flowers to bloom in a sense. And we now are hearing examples of one or two technologies emerging. I know we're going to hear from Ali on podcasting later this afternoon, but there were other examples again from Exeter and from the OU, seeing things like Illuminate sessions emerging as something that staff and students are liking and adopting and using, and they're fairly low cost but they have high impact. And I suppose as we start to look at sustainability, one thing you might want to consider is not trying to get everything that you've experimented with sustained. You might just pick up on one or two things that you want to try in some kind of phased way, get sustained and embedded into your structures. Students want the change to continue, but of course new cohorts of learners will join your institutions. So I suppose for me, and new staff will join your institutions. So the question for me on sustainability is, what are we doing to now redesign and adapt and evolve our student induction models so that these new technologies are an integral part of student induction, and also staff and CPD models as well, because they need to be embedded there as well as part of sustainability. And yes, I do agree with Malcolm that ownership is being transferred into the teaching teams, but there were aspirations for some to transfer it to other teaching teams, and the clear message for me coming out of that was to get others to be persuaded to adopt, they need evidence. And so as you exit and as you wrap up your projects, the need for evidence to show that the changes that you've made are actually working, both in terms of tutors' views and learners. The more you can capture there, the better, and more success I believe you'll have in getting others to not just hear about it, but actually adopt it and embed it into practice. And sometimes the simple achievements, like the bio labs, yes, at Bristol. At Bristol, the simple achievements that just, things like health and safety in the lab has improved, or they know how to do something that doesn't cause a problem when they're actually in the lab now, is a good example of a very simple thing that happens now that hadn't happened before, because you used to give them a massive list of how to do what was it you did? Sorry, remind me.
Centrifuges, how to use a centrifuge.
Yeah, how to use that. Huge list of instruction now is simply something they learn in the bio lab.